VR, AR, MR is actually a pretty big topic. Everybody here, I would like to know if you guys have some experience in VR. Anyone has done VR? More on the distribution side or the creative side? Creative? Okay, good. Anyone has done any AR development? Involved in AR as well? Okay, good. Mixed reality goes with both, so we're pretty much covered. So as a quick overview of what we are talking in terms of like new technologies and how VR and AR gets involved, there are many aspects of how you can use VR. And I think we should always ask ourselves what each one of those technologies' strengths are. And when you guys were building up your projects and, even from like a writing or creative perspective, an understanding of what exactly each platform is and what are their strengths. So when we're talking about virtual reality, it's a pretty big umbrella. There are many ways that you can do it. You can talk about, like playing games. It could be Beat Saber. It could be a simulated, surgeon simulator. It could be so many things that you could actually do with VR in addition to watching and playing movies. When you're talking about AR, it's usually when you're using your phones. It could be like the Instagram. It could be you actually overlaying and building up your own app where you put, other objects on top of it and augmenting the reality. And that can also be using glasses. So when you're talking virtual reality is when you put a headset and completely, takes you to another place. It could be, Mars, moons, or anything related like that. When you're talking about AR, is actually the application itself when you're using phones and glasses that augment your reality. So I'm Danilo Moura Silva. I have been involved in a lot of projects, both on the VR and the AR side. Right now I'm working with a company that recreate location-based entertainment, very, very deep into VR, where you could have like real walls, you could touch different things, it really feels like you are in a different place at the top level of VR. The previous project I worked on actually has a lot of different verticals, goes all the way up to AR as well. And I would like to let everybody do an introduction of yourselves, and then briefly, and then we can go over slides if you guys have slides to cover it. Okay? So let's start with David.
Sure. Hey, I'm Dave Birnbaum. I work in a field called haptics, so some of you have seen me before. I'm here all the time, and I'm always the guy that's talking about something completely different than everyone else because I'm concerned with the sense of touch and the amount of immersion that we can achieve with immersive entertainment and going beyond the eyes and ears and involving the body and the entire brain. I've been doing this pretty much my whole career, and I have a music and design background. Immersion Corporation, my company, we only work in haptics, but we work across a variety of different industries. So automotive, medical, gaming, wearables, mobile, many different fields. And personally, what my goal is to kind of bring the sense of touch to creatives and create the tools, the workflows, the design patterns, guidelines, all the types of things that creatives need in order to create new content for the sense of touch and to consider that in their process. So just leave it there.
Hi, I'm David Gull with Outer Realm, and we create content for real estate storytelling, and that's for new developments, and that's to showcase properties, get tenants, get purchasers before a property is ever even built. And what's interesting about this is just that words, 2D images, animations, all the tools that we've had up until the last few years are really subpar ways of telling people what a space or a property or a new development is going to look like. And so now we're able to truly immerse people in that, give them a sense for exactly what you're looking to build and get them excited about it, get them enrolled in it. And show them scale, which is something you can't do with images, show them the complete picture, full 360, and then also place that into the context of the existing world.
Hello, so my name is Marta, and I am the founder of a company called Garage Stories, that we are a lab for innovation in the film industry, and basically our methodology is co-creation. So the way we work is by gathering creatives from all sorts of backgrounds, filmmakers, hackers, artists, musicians, designers, all those profiles that have a say in these new emerging mediums. And basically we organize labs that range from 3 hours, which is just about generating ideas on how to envision industries evolving to with the impact of these technologies, to longer labs, which are up to 2 weeks, where we actually work on challenges, either from traditional media companies that want to incorporate these technologies into their productions, or from technology companies that want to understand how to actually design immersive content. And basically what we look is for always highly talented professionals, and we bring them together and we have designer methodologies to be able to make the most of everyone's skills and inputs.
Lots of people will want to talk to her after this is over.
Hopefully.
My name is Mark Ricard. I'm a film producer turned VR producer, full-time now. And I started a company, content creation company called Virtuality in 2017. And our early works, we've been very fortunate to run a broad spectrum of experiential and narrative content. We've worked in volumetric space. We were the first credited with doing a volumetric Shakespeare piece in 2017. And our flagship venture is the America's Got Talent finalists Light Balance, and that's coming out next week. We have output deals with Amaze VR and 360 projector company called Brumex Technologies. And right now, our focus is on cinematic narrative as a driver in the immersive space, particularly the tenets of Hollywood movies in VR. And we've done some very exciting projects that are in the works. Right on cue, I see the director of one such project walk in. So I'll finish now before he gets up here and starts telling you about it.
Excellent. Thanks. Hi, my name is Yvette Vargas. I am a content creator, storyteller, writer, director, producer, both on the traditional side and then obviously on the immersive. I work in television, films, and VR, AR, and MR. My focus from the very beginning of working in this space has been how do you tell, or answering the question, how do you tell a narrative scripted story and immersive? And I pretty much set out to fill in some of those blanks for the last 6 years. And so much so that Final Draft actually commissioned me to create the immersive play, which is the professional script writing template for VR, AR, and MR perspectives. And so with that, speaking of tenets, every one of those script writing templates, there's a methodology that really speaks to the tenets of VR, the tenets of AR, and MR obviously is a combination of the two, depending on what you're trying to achieve there. So very much my particular goal and just my passion in the space is telling scripted narrative stories in VR, AR, and MR.
I'm Eric Neveretti. I'm one of the co-founders and the chief marketing officer at ARWall. We're an augmented reality startup company, and we create larger-than-life illusions. One of the things that makes us unique from other augmented reality developers, though, is that our illusions do not need a device with them in order to be seen. They can be seen with the naked eye. So we think that this is an exciting development because fans and users of this sort of content, this is a more frictionless way for them to engage with it, and to also have the people standing over their shoulder in the crowd see exactly what they're interacting with and become more excited to try out those sorts of experiences as well.
Awesome. Eric, we actually want to go back to you at the end, if you can speak a little bit more of how you guys actually are achieving that. As someone on the space, I got very curious on how you guys are actually achieving that. We thought it would be nice to put a few videos to explain some of the things that we're going to talk about, specifically about the new technologies and what's the part of the experiential content going on in the space. Before working on this, Pharaohs and Egyptian project shot in Cairo, I actually was fortunate enough to work on a movie called Seven Miracles, which I will play a video right now. It is a mix of, it's about 80 minutes content, it's a mix about 70 minutes of 360 video and volumetric video. And what we mean by that is 360 video, whereas most of the content started, like 2-3 years ago was made, is you have multiple cameras shooting in all directions outwards, and you stitch that image into one spherical volume, and you have to be very careful on how one camera blends to the other. So here's an explanation of how you should be very careful to avoid that to be seen. That can break the illusion. It's pretty interesting because you can actually look all the way around. You can look into any direction, but a few challenges with that technology are you're actually stuck into a position and a height. So we made it as a seated experience, so you can really feel like most people, as you can see here in our panel, everybody sitting down has pretty much the same height, but when you're standing up, a lot of people have a lot of different heights, and kids can feel like if they put a camera in a human's, adult height, it can feel like they're flying or they're too low, so there's a little bit of those challenges. And here's the same scene shot in volumetric. When you shoot in volumetric, 6 degrees of freedom, you usually scan the environment separate from the actors, and you have to really do a lot on the post-production side to be able to combine those two scenes. You can see here that we have a relight to make those two scenes to, blend together. It starts to get pretty much visual effects everywhere. Let me skip a little bit just to give more time for everybody. So here's the background of how, the making of. So you have the actors being shot in surrounded by a dome of cameras. And what you get out of this is you have about 30 to 60 3D models that are real geometry. When we talk about 3D, and don't get confused with stereoscopic, I'm really talking about a real 3D model that you can actually rotate, you can walk around, and then we go to a software like Maya, Houdini, or a game engine like Unity and Unreal, and assemble all of those pieces together. So you can see here the environment was actually scanned using technology called photogrammetry, but you can also use laser scanning. Photogrammetry has become very popular just because it's very accessible, it's fast, and it's very affordable compared to laser scanners. And here's how the environment was captured. So when we are talking about true VR room scale, the production is actually very challenging, and as you guys are probably familiar, 360 is also very challenging. The advantages of 360 video is that it's streamable. You can just click and you can start watching the content right away. In volumetric video, you have to download all of those assets, and really, becomes like a file that you have to download first, to go and watch. So, but you can also use those assets to create, the game environments later. You can also have the volumetric artists and actors being used for an AR experience later. So it's kind of segmented in a way that you have the, your talent, your live action. You can also use that for an AR experience, and that's where Eric, I got interested to see how can we combine those two. And now I'm going to pass to David, who's going to go a little bit over the touch part.
Thank you. Okay, this is a subset of slides that were given to a group of people who are designing devices and user experiences for AR, VR, XR. And so just really briefly about immersion. So as I mentioned, we're in a lot of different verticals, and we build the kind of infrastructure to enable tactile feedback, haptic feedback to be integrated with touch screens, all kinds of different devices. We're seeing more of this kind of migrate onto the body with wearables, and we're also seeing higher and higher fidelity gaming interfaces being created. More and more haptic actuators of higher quality are being integrated into game controllers. If you go to an LBE, sometimes you're putting on a vest and you're feeling haptics in the vest or in the rifle that you're holding, et cetera. And this is kind of a very funny short little video. This is CyberGlove Systems, but this was actually an immersion product we developed. So this is what haptics looked like in the 90s. And if there was audio, you could hear really funny 90s electronic music, early 90s electronic music. Anyway, so we've come a long way, and we're seeing the devices shrink and shrink. Now, it's different between haptics in VR 1.0, which is what that device was for. It was a couple $100,000 or whatever it cost, and we sold a few per year to large research labs. Now we have VR 2.0, where stuff is really becoming democratized, right? But the difference is now we have new models for engagement. So we have LBEs, we have a renewed interest in pop culture, and this little movie, Ready Player One, really set the expectation of a lot of consumers. Now I get the question all the time as a haptic designer, when am I getting my suit so that I can be like perfectly transported? And of course in the movie it set this almost unrealistically high bar that VR means perfect transportation. You will completely feel like you're immersed. And in a way that's a little bit distracting, because you can do a lot with today's technology. You don't need to create the Ready Player One experience to make haptics enhance the content that you're making. For example, if you have an AR app on mobile, or sorry, a VR app on mobile, AR app on mobile, you can use the motor in the phone to make the app more engaging for people. These are just some high-level design guidelines for VR and kind of how you integrate haptics with a VR experience effectively. You have to think about things like story points, performance actions, environmental effects. So these are the types of things that our designers are familiar with, and we promote to the industry. I won't get too deep there, but just to know that there's a systematic way of going about this. Now AR is completely different from haptic perspective, because VR is almost an easier problem to solve. You have an expectation that the user is going to be either holding a device or having something on their head or their body, and they have this expectation that they're going somewhere and they're changing modes from their normal course of life. They're like leaving the real world behind and entering a fantasy world, and so they're willing to do things like take their shoes off and put on a vest and put on a thing and blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on, because they're like, I want more stuff on my body. I want to be totally immersed. In AR, it's the opposite. AR sets the expectation that reality is mixed with virtuality, right? And so the less, the better. So from a haptic perspective, we're like, well, then how do we engage your sense of touch there? So we're looking at things like wearables that don't interfere with your ability to use your hands. Let's say you can touch an AR object that's not really there, and then you can reach out and open a doorknob, and that's totally seamless. And AR, of course, as you may know, not to get too semantic, but it isn't really a specific term. It's actually interesting. At Digital Hollywood, AR typically means, what I found is magic window, you're holding a phone, you're looking around. In other industries, that's not really the case. That's really seen as kind of a stepping stone that's maybe even a little bit disappointing from an immersive experience perspective. So we're looking at things like MR, like what does it really mean to have a mix of virtual objects and real objects in the environment that are so consistently mixed that they're even mixed for your tactile sense, so that you can't even, eventually there's just no difference between them. Like you can reach out and touch something that is not there, that is there. The designer intended that. So we have these kind of guidelines for what haptics can do for immersive technology. I won't get too deeply into them, but there are certain things that they're very good at and certain things that are not. And so as creatives, you can learn this as a craft. You can build a kind of this, we talk about film language and film, and people are so familiar with film tropes that you can do things as a director and just expect the audience to get it. And we're not there yet with haptics, but we're sort of getting there. There are kind of the beginnings of a haptic language akin to film language being developed. Okay, so what? So your content is already haptic. I like this line. A lack of haptics has a haptic quality all its own. So at this point, if you have an experience that you're showing on a device, whether it be a game controller, a phone, whatever it may be, and you choose not to design the sense of touch alongside the other modalities, then that's a creative choice that you have to own. I mean, at this point, I think it's fair to say that. And so I would encourage you to think about that. Like, a lack of haptics has certain qualities. It makes you feel like you're ungrounded. Maybe there's like the objects you're interacting with are ghostly, unstable. If you want that to be the case, go for it. If you don't, if you're trying to ground somebody in the experience and make them convinced of place and self, and that they've been transformed, then I would suggest that haptics are a key part of that. More sensory bandwidth is more engagement with content. This is actually kind of a neurophysiological reality, right? If you want your viewers to engage with the content because you want whatever it may be, it's an advertisement, you want them to recall the marketing messages, you want them to spend more time interacting. If you engage more of their nervous system, more of their brain, more of their bodies, you're going to get higher levels of engagement, and you can measure that dozens of ways. We've done some of those studies, and it really is true. For the marketers, like you're more likely to recall a marketing message when you have experienced that message concurrently with a haptic stimulus. So that's huge, right? And then, what does that say? Oh, so then haptics are good for different types of messages, and as creatives, we have to understand that and know what it's good for. Like, you're not gonna probably create a haptic sensation that correlates to the spelling of a word, right? That, like with Morse code or something, so like that's not what it's for. If you want to raise people's sense of urgency or anxiety, you want to make people feel like they're intimately or closely connected with other people, you want people to feel a sense of stability and concreteness, all those types of design values haptics can do. So knowing that palette is a critical part of the process. So we did some AR projects this year that are new that I can talk to. One of them is called Metalhead. It's an AR game, and what's interesting about this is it's meant to be played with the phone being held like this, and you scan the floor. It uses AR core. You scan the floor, and these robots start to fall all around you and hunt you, and you can feel them walking towards you, even if you can't see them. So what's cool is we're using haptics as like a game mechanic. So now, even if you don't see anything in front of you, you feel footsteps coming closer and closer. You're looking for it. You finally find the robot. You can kill it, and of course you feel haptics with the different weapons that you're using. But what was unique about this was we actually found like kind of a new creative possibility for haptics in mobile AR, which was cool. Next one is Materializer. This was an interesting project. The effort was to see whether we could create the illusion of material properties at a distance using just the phone. So again, this is not a great actuator in here. It's typically medium to low quality actuator. So the idea of creating, the difference between wood, boilerplate, grass, carpet, that was a real challenge. And if you set the expectation that you're going to feel grass, and then you put your finger on the screen and rub the screen and you feel vibrations, then you're disappointing people. You've set the wrong expectation. But what we found is with this little robotic arm in the corner, it's like, just like if you use like a tool to reach out and touch an object, and the sensation you get is mediated through the tool, your expectations are different, and you don't expect that that's actually going to feel like cloth, but you are going to feel, as you poke it with the tool, you're going to feel that it's there, and you're going to see it react. So we're doing all these kinds of tricks to kind of make the actuator in the phone good enough to get people to be convinced that they're actually touching grass, carpet, et cetera, and it worked pretty well. So a couple of examples of how haptics can be used in unexpected ways. This is a haptic synthesizer we developed alongside that project to kind of show the creative possibilities for game designers who are working in AR, how haptics in AR can be uniquely synthesized, and so there's certain design parameters that we've curated here. So these are my 3 takeaways for you. Your content is already haptic. Haptics creates more engagement, so if your goal is engagement, think about that. And haptics have certain uses that are better than others.
Awesome.
With that,
Now we're going to pass actually to David Gull as I switch to your presentation, Marta.
Okay.
David, as an architect and a founder of Outer Realm, like what exactly motivated you, and how do you see VR and AR opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, as a design expert and having 15 years of thinking and designing in 3D, I realized that I still had this fundamental limitation in the human imagination, which is to visualize something that's not simply right in front of you. And so we finally have these tools available The first time I put on a VR headset and stood inside of a project that I had designed and realized that it wasn't what I expected it to be was kind of that watershed moment. And I think now, you know, the goal, the mission of Outer Realm is to bring that power of, you know, the ability essentially to see the future to other people. And so that's really what we're setting out to do. In our case, it's not as entertainment oriented. It's really, really practical for people who are looking to design a building or looking to make a very, very serious investment, which real estate is. The definition of high ceilings is obviously widely varied. Everyone has their definition of it. We've also done something like a supersonic jet as an enterprise project, and again, the definition of large, comfortable seats is subjective. And so we're looking at this tool as a way to concretely communicate about something that doesn't exist. And it's been really, really powerful for people. We've had folks purchase homes before the first shovel's ever even in the ground. We've had folks raise money up to $100 million for projects that are just in there initially were just figments of their own imagination that they then had to communicate to other stakeholders and investors. So yeah, storytelling tool, but the main difference for us is that it's spatial and that it's immersive and that it can communicate about something in a way that 2D images or drawings never could.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that VR does really well is the sense of scale, right? You know, I've seen pictures of Italy many times. When I went there for the first time, I was like, whoa, some of those statues are actually gigantic. So can you give us a few more examples of what you feel like would be like the key advantages of Outer Realm?
Yeah, so I mean, the other main one is that whenever you're communicating about a project in 2 dimensions, you're always leaving the rest of the project to someone's imagination. And when you're doing that, when people are making large decisions, they are making them based on confidence level and trust. And when you can understand something fully, you have a higher level of confidence and trust. And when you don't, when things are left to your imagination and you're wondering if the person that you're talking to, the words that they're saying, if they match your words, then you have less levels of trust. So elevating that, getting people to the level of confidence that you have alignment on your vision is really what moves the needle. And yeah, that's it.
And who would you say that would be like your main customer at this point?
The main, it's an interesting dynamic because the customer, the one that pays us, is a developer or a broker or someone looking to tell the story, but the other customer is the end user, the person looking to make the purchase or move into the building. So we really have different stakeholders. And one really interesting thing that I think is a little different than entertainment content in VR that we've had to design around has been, how do you give someone a really highly curated experience? So we actually think of our scenes more as 3-dimensional PowerPoints. And so we've had to design it, instead of someone in the scene controlling their experience, we have someone outside of the scene, a host, controlling their experience. So we have a whole toolkit that's a clickable or a touchscreen interface on a PC or HD TV that lets someone outside the headset control the experience of someone inside the headset. So that's been a sort of different interaction paradigm than what everyone else I think is probably working around, which is how does someone inside the headset control their experience.
Yeah, and I'm always going to be trying to understand a little bit of the business behind. Actually, I came here as a research and development engineer for Sony Pictures and left after 8 years to be working on innovative and new platforms and a lot of cool projects. And I think as I see a lot of also content creators here that are looking for creative and new technologies and work of innovation, you always have to figure it out. What is the right timing for some of those experiences, right? Yeah. So right now we keep hearing a lot of people shifting from VR to AR, but there are so many cases of successful VR experiences that I also would like to make sure people don't come out of the talk with like a label of what works or doesn't, but just like a good examples of what is the state of the industry at this moment. And I feel like Marta has some really good things coming up with the garage stories and how to help, also the community and how to showcase a lot of different projects. So I want to change to your slides, and you have the clicker, right? You start for you.
So Garage Stories, as I mentioned before, is this meeting point, this playground, where it's not educational, or we don't try to tell people how or what to do. It's about rather creating this space where people from very different backgrounds can come together and kind of make the most of everyone inside. And also, we branded Garage Stories, first of all, because it was founded in a garage in Palo Alto, but also because we really liked what the garage evokes, which is a place where you are allowed to play, which means that you're allowed to take risks, because you're allowing yourself to fail. So out of this concept was born Garage Stories. And yeah, this was the first one we ever did. It was 2 years ago in the garage that gave name to the project. And for us, it was a complete test, because my background is in film, and I had been running co-creation festivals with traditional media for several years in Europe. And when I moved to Silicon Valley looking for inspiration, I got in touch with all of these technologies, and it blew my mind the possibilities that it had. But what I found, also because I was in Silicon Valley, is that everyone was worried about the technology, fulfilling the expectations, but they were not working so much on the content. And that's how we decided, okay, let's do this test where we bring everyone together, not to focus on technology and hacking new possibilities for this, but just by what we have and what can already imagine that can be done. Because technology, we assume that no matter what is going to get there. It might take 5 years or 10. But it was about more the stories and why we use them for. And it was a complete test. So we just opened the application form. Garage Stories was nothing that anyone knew. It was the first time we were ever doing anything. But we were mind blown, because we started receiving applications from people working at Google, at Facebook, at Magic Leap. So that was when we realized that what we're doing kind of makes sense. And basically the first time it was just a weekend where we bring 20 people. It was never about organizing large events. It's more about selecting the right people to come to the events. And it was 20 people a weekend, and it was engaging on a conversation about where are we going to, what had everyone experienced with, and getting all these brains together to see what comes out of it. And since then, well, we've been lucky enough to be organizing labs and workshops all over the world. We've been running workshops at the MIT, at Sonar, in South America. We've been working a lot, and also in Europe. And I'm going to show you some examples of the kind of projects that have come out of Garage Stories, which, as I said, it can range from 3 hours to 2 weeks. Normally, the average we do is 1 week though. So at the very beginning, when we opened Garage Stories, especially me, that I was coming from a film background, the most obvious kind of step was into VR. Just the content and just focusing on how do we create immersive VR short films. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This one is the one we created at Sitges Film Festival. It's a fantastic film festival in near Barcelona. And here, what we experienced was with creating dual experiences, which means that the piece was thought to be experienced by 2 people at the same time, which were sitting next to each other. And if I was sitting in one chair, which was the chair of the doctor, and the other chair was for the mental patient, I will see distorted realities from each side. But if I was in the chair of the doctor, I will actually see the mental patient next to me. And I will actually also have a real person next to me. And what we're trying to do with this piece is to create organic haptics. So to encourage the real people through the virtual character to interact with the person sitting next to them. Also, we figure out that having this dual perspective also created more empathy for the story we're trying to tell, which was about the mental patients and how in a lot of psychiatric places they are just given medication with no further input. That was the message of the short film. And then also in Barcelona, in this edition, which was 2 weeks, we experimented with mixing VR with live actors. So the story will begin before you ever put the headset on. And this is an example of
Oh,
The piece that we did in Barcelona, we did 4. Normally, out of each garage, it comes 4 to 10 projects. In that case, we're 4. And we showcased the story in the same music club that it was filmed. And basically, it will be the room, a huge room that was the music club. And the story that they were telling was that music club was an analogic Facebook, which means that every time you go into the club, your memories are stored on a cloud that keeps whatever you did in that club. And once a month, the club opens its doors so people can go there to rewatch their memories and decide whether to keep them or delete them. So on the area where people was waiting, we already had actors that were teasing people imagination into that reality that we had created. So there was a couple fighting about why had they to do that. There was another guy who was very nervous because he was never selected. But it was just side conversations you were hearing that were teasing your imagination. And when you actually get into the room where the headsets were, there was 10 high stools with a headset on each of them and a big laser on the middle. So whenever the door is closed and the session is about to begin, the laser got activated to select one person. Of course, the main actress was always hidden in the group and she was always selected. But what everyone will see is her memories, like popping up in shades of light, until they appear linearly. It was a story about how she met her ex-girlfriend, but at some point they start becoming blurry as she cannot focus anymore because her emotions are taking over. And at some point you will feel someone trying to grab your headset off. And it was actually the ex-girlfriend she was remembering that she was super angry because she was trying to delete her. So the fight, the final story will finish live. And it had some good points about it, which is the story was live. It had never the same ending because the girls were also improvising. So it all had always different endings. And also we figured out that people had like really strange reactions to that. There was a guy that actually put the headset on again, thinking that the show was not over. Or there was people who were trying to be nice, like, no, it's okay, like, you girls should try it. And other people that were like, yes, she was trying to delete you. But it was interesting how breaking what you think that's happening, because with the headset, you're kind of isolated and relaxed. If that's broken and then you actually have the people that's real in front of you, the reactions were really interesting. And it's
awesome. That's a great story. It looks like the computer died. Some of the connection here died. But,
And just very briefly, then what we did with that is that we realized that we were like getting a lot of like nice insights, but also we realized that we were just focusing on the content, because the way we frame it is how to tell immersive stories with VR. But then we realized that maybe we had to take one step further and not only think about the content, but also the container. Because who said that that format was the good one? Maybe we had to take a step further and broaden it to AR, MR, VR, all sorts of technologies, and kind of think, okay, why should it be in a headset? Why should it, like, completely rethink it from scratch? So not only designing the content, but also the container, and imagining how do we want these technologies to actually shape industries. We mainly work with entertainment, but since we work with the storytelling, it can be applied to many industries, like you were speaking, for example, in the real estate. And I had prepared 2 more examples, but maybe if we can fix them, I can give him the turn and later I can show.
Yeah. I think we have just 20 more minutes left, so we're going to go back to it when we have time. So Mark, as an award-winning, like film producer and VR creator as well, when you see both like VR and AR technologies, what excites you the most, and what would you say there are like some of the best things that you created that you are proud of?
Well, our next piece is called Blue Screen of Death. It's coming soon. That question can probably be answered singularly in the sense that one piece I alluded to earlier but didn't provide detail on is a thing we shot last summer that was a VR series and a 2D feature film at the same time. And it was it was acknowledged as the first attempt to do that, and possibly the last, because it was a huge undertaking.
But I think it's good to talk about this, because actually one of the things that we did on that movie was actually to shoot it in 8K and then cut the 1080p version out of it from the 8K, so you have close-ups. You can also cut in 4K, but a little bit further. So I think it's important for us to talk about how do you achieve multiple platforms, right? And I think that's what exactly we're trying to do when you shot. But you shot 2 times, like with a 360 camera and also a flat?
Yes. Well, in this case, what we did is we shot 360 in the mornings, and then we would come in and do 2D coverage in the afternoons. And the process was assisted largely by the fact that it was a single location, and that was by design, because it would have been too difficult to do company moves. So we built it in a theatrical conceit, and exploited the tenets of the story to benefit the efficiency of workflow. And you and I talked about that briefly, the notion that you can utilize a 360 master asset as the predecessor to what the 2D content actually is. And that's where I do get very excited on 2 different fronts. First of all, a happy accident that was born from our workflow was that despite the fact we were looking at doing a 2D feature film and a VR series as separate sort of standalone pieces, what happened as a result of having the 2D assets, essentially, if you think about a 360 piece that you may be shooting, and the limitations of that with the distance for actors and all of the inherent issues that come with the 360 workflow, we found that getting the 2D assets and being able to utilize them concurrently with the 360 affords a new level of immersive narrative. And by that, without getting too detailed, what I mean is utilizing the 2D assets along with the 360 assets in immersive space to tell a more robust and engaging emotional story, right? And this is a very forward-looking consideration, but we really do feel that this piece, albeit it was a kind of a test piece at a lower budget, sets the table for what's possible going forward, because I think largely, and when I look around this room, I see a lot of faces that I know. This is almost like a immersive family reunion in here, but so I'm not telling people things they don't know necessarily, but I think largely part of the problem with the fits and starts of the initial foray into the immersive landscape for brands and where the money was for content was that what came back was not engaging. It wasn't narrative driven, and it left sort of a kind of a scar on the landscape to where people thought that what they had seen was the max that was available in terms of the engagement there, and it's quite the opposite. In fact, the driver of this way of thinking is really to coach people up that your 360 asset can be the master asset, and whereas right now it's usually used for sidecar marketing and a secondary afterthought or an ancillary feature. If you dedicate your shoot to be, and I should not say 360, by the way, I should say VR, because it's irrespective of whether you choose to ideate in 360 or not. It's easier if you don't. But your VR asset can be the master asset from which you capture a more immersive story, and then you can, if the resolution affords, you can clip out what you need for the 2D assets and then maximize across platforms that way. And 2019, you heard it here first, or maybe you didn't, but that's where things are headed. And as soon as that catches on as a workflow and a viable way of thinking among the people who are clinging to the kind of 2D landscape as the only way it's ever been and will be, you're going to see a complete reversion. And it's not that sides are at odds. It's just more efficient, and it allows you to port into every way of displaying your content, which is what all of us as creators are actually chasing to begin with, and brands for that matter.
Yeah, and actually, the volumetric scenes, which are already inside of like Maya, Houdini, or something, you can also make the 2D version flat to add to the story that you're trying to tell. So speaking about stories, we have Yvette here, which is an award-winning writer and creator. You have worked with also a lot of big brands and IPs like Fast and Furious and Lord of the Rings. When a client comes to you or a partner to say, hey, let's talk about this story, and they're going to create that in VR. What do you see, just because I feel like a lot of the people here is also content creators, so I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit of, if you could talk a little bit of VR and AR, how you separate the two and how you focus on the strengths of each.
Sure. In terms of when a client or a partner comes to me, or I go to them to pitch an idea, it's always starting with the narrative. What story do we want to tell? Regardless if it's VR, AR, or MR, what is the story that we want to tell? And from that, also, and obviously, what is the experience that we want to tell? So it's really answering both those questions. What is the story we want to tell, and what is the experience that we want people to feel? From there, and I'll actually share an example of this was a feature film called The Current War, which has actually just received a release date. I wrote and directed the virtual reality experience for that, and produced it as well. But this was a case where the film had already been shot. It was in the process of post. It was still being edited, and a lot of post work. It was very visual effects heavy film. And I was able to, of course, read the screenplay and see some footage, and I ended up pitching a narrative for the virtual reality experience, which basically took place as soon as the actual theatrical film finished. So from the ending of the film, the VR experience began, and I just pitched that particular narrative the way that I would pitch any narrative, but including what is that experience, what is the potential agency of that, how can we deliver it for maximum impact, and what is the messaging also. If this was a standalone piece, if the film did not exist, what is this virtual reality experience? And that's something that I'm always engaging clients and partners to answer with me, because in terms of where we're at, I think that we have to really be thinking of these experiences that we are creating, where they really can be standalone, because content is everywhere, right? The audience is everywhere, and there are various entry points to every piece of IP. So whatever it is that we're working on, especially in our industry here, is that it has to be the absolute best that it can be, because that may be the entry point into an IP or potential franchise. So on the entertainment side, these are very important conversations to be having. So that's usually where I start there. What is the story? What is your experience? And what is the end game and the end result that we want? In terms of the actual work, the storytelling itself, going back to the immersive play that I created for Final Draft, and yes, there's definitely a version for virtual reality storytelling, augmented and mixed, because there are differences as we know up here, clearly. But one of the things that, for myself, especially with mixed reality, that really struck me as both a writer and a creator, and then also having a similar experience as David, where he designed something and then put on a headset. It's like, okay, you know what? It didn't quite work the way that I had planned it. One of the things that I find, especially in AR and MR, is that the design, the actual, the opportunities to engage, the design of that is just as important as the narrative. That's definitely something, a conclusion that I've come to, and also, my teams and the people that we work with, because there is a process to actually engage with the narrative and the whole experience of it all, where there is a human design element that is necessary, and then there's also the onboarding process of that, and all of that becomes part of the story and the experience. So these are also additional elements to be thinking about. with your client, with your partner, or just even when you're pitching this, because these are answers that have to, these are problems that have to be solved.
Yeah, this is what I really like about this panel here, is because we have a mix, you know, the technology, also the content creation. Eric, can you tell us a little bit more of how can we use your amazing AR wall technology?
Certainly. So we initially started the company off as a filmmaking tool, and it was initially conceived to get rid of green screen for productions. So we created a large-scale displays, typically with LED walls, and we would have the virtual set extension, so to speak. Basically, the thing that you would composite using that green screen plate months down the line, displaying that live on set, so the performers can see what's happening behind them, they can react to the things happening around them, and you get a final shot composited in there, and you get rid of the months of post-production, which we thought was a pretty exciting idea, and a lot of people were excited by it. But what we found out almost immediately after creating this and showing it off to people was we had a lot of people say, like, but could I use it for this? And that is why we started to pivot away from being exclusively focused on filmmaking and more into experientials and marketing and those sorts of things. So we can do things like take an asset from a feature film. It's funny that Ready Player One gets brought up so often in this sort of space, but we, for instance, designed something for them where we took that egg from the film, the actual CG asset from ILM, and created a life-size exhibit where users could walk up to it and pretend to touch it, and when they take that video selfie with their phone, it looks like they're back, like literally standing inside the movie. So we could do things along those lines. Where you can experience it, I mean, we're talking to agencies and brands and studios about adapting the different works they have and creating basically immersive experiences. I think that I'm really fortunate in that I work at an office where everyone inside of it has like a playful mindset, and they're very curious. And we're approaching it from, I think, the same vantage point that a lot of users, the end users, have, is what would be fun about this? What would make it fun about going into the world of Ready Player One or any sort of thing that's going out there? And trying to figure out like what would be unique about that experience, and then also having the tools to build that thing is really exciting. And I think that's the most exciting thing about what we're doing, is that it's not just about creating the content, we're creating the content that we would like to use as well.
And do you see AR wall also being used for virtual production specifically? Like for, I will give an example, The Lion King, the new creation, totally CG, has been heavily used in virtual production, which is one of the things that as creators and technologists, you can also really use, virtual reality and 3D assets to be able to tell your stories. Have you also experimented a little bit on that side?
Yeah, I think that the uses for it for virtual production, I think, are already pretty existent. Like, there are equivalent tools that are out there that are doing it. We could certainly move into that space a little bit as well. But I think the thing that excites us most is being part of that final shot. And that's something unique that we bring that other AR, VR tools that filmmakers have access to can't really do at the moment, is we can give you that shot and you walk away and you have it locked in already.
Okay. So we have actually 5 minutes for questions. Yes?
So, quality of filmmaking in VR has been always a problematic issue. What are the tools coming up in 2019 that will help bring the quality up to what we are used to as consumers of 2D, right?
So the question is related to, like how to actually improve the quality of, the content that is being created. We also have a challenge because usually the high budget blockbusters, they usually spend $1 million a minute. And how much can we do with the budgets that we have, right? So anyone want to specifically address that?
Yeah, I'm not to cut across anyone, but my knee-jerk reaction to that would be, I think the space is going to benefit greatly from higher mobile tracking headsets like the Quest, because they sustain a better resolution for the output, and then the move from CPU rendering to GPU rendering is actually gonna allow for, you know, more fluid processing times and higher resolutions, but quality isn't necessarily just what you see before you in terms of, you know, the crispness of an image. It's a lot to do with the storytelling as well. So, you know, I know I've got some people up here that have my back on that. But I think I mean, as a content creator, I stay in this middle lane of, like, I'm creating content. The hardware wars and the platform wars and all that are happening on either side of me, and may the best company win, because I'll use them at the end, you know.
I would argue that I think the technology is improving, and that's obviously going to be a big help. But what is going to make the ultimate difference is that we're beholden to, I think, 2D filmmaking techniques and styles, and I think that there does need to be like a VR filmic language that needs to be created, and conventions and types of storytelling that the audience can use as kind of a starting point. A lot of people, when they put on a VR headset or attempt an experience, often that's the first time they've ever been inside of one of those things. So if there were some conventions that I think held, that would help not only shape the sort of stories, but also help usher that user through the experience and understand where they should be looking, how they should be engaging, and all those things.
Just wanted to add to that a bit, because I mean, I completely agree with everything that's being said. I'm definitely have been trying to, as well as many others, but create a language. Definitely create a language, because we can't help it. We can't help but compare VR or immersive to 2D, because 2D is what we know. 2D is absolutely what we know, and the immersive storytelling is just completely different. It really is its own medium. And even though I say that a million times, and many people say that a million times, until you literally experience it and experience the difference, truly what the difference is, and I'm really referring to just the premium of the content in the space that so few people actually get to see in the way that it was intended to experience. And when you do get to engage on that level, then I think most people get it like, oh wow, you know what? This is not film, this is not television, this is actually not like anything else, and these are the possibilities. So I completely agree with Mark. Let's just continue to tell great stories, and the technology and the storytelling will merge eventually, where you won't even be asking that question anymore.
Yeah, hopefully we're going to have much more, devices. It's kind of like a catch-22 at this point, the amount of people that can actually watch the content the way it was intended. Yes?
I had a question, I think, for the gentleman in the middle. You had mentioned shooting 2D in the afternoon after you'd shot in the 360 or whatever in the morning. This might go to kind of a cinematic language conversation, but are you being able to use that in the 360 environment to draw attention to?
Yes. And I'm glad you asked, because when Eric said that, I wanted to. By the way, that's like next year's panel, I guess, or talking about that specifically. But that was a breakthrough for us in both the engagement and the rules of what the immersive landscape can be. It was a highly complex mathematical process that took weeks and weeks, and algorithms and whiteboards, and I mean it was messy. But what we ended up with was the ability to inlay 2D assets, and an example being you see a group having a conversation, and they're 10 feet away, but we can use what we're now dubbing emotional lenses as an opportunity to use the same footage. It's not the same take necessarily, but you can't really tell. But you use the same footage from the same scene of the same actor, and you can key in on the coverage of what the primary dialogue is, as well as the reaction shots, and blend it in a way that makes it so much more interesting. I mean, the biggest feedback for us has just been that people watch something that was 10 minutes and they were like, oh my God, that felt like 3, and it kept my interest the entire time, which to us checked a huge box, because prior to this, the big knock has been like people are getting bored. If you're heat map, tracking the heat maps, you see that people are like apathetic about what's going on in there, and they're just riding it out. This was the complete antithesis of that, and so I doubled down on saying that everybody's workflow, for better or worse, should include the capture of 2D assets. Even if it's from a curated standpoint, to where you know exactly what the moment you're going to use is in that space. I personally now, I guess until I've done it 50 times and everybody's accusing me of being a one-trick pony or whatever, but I personally ideate that way. It informs everything that I'm even considering doing is a blending of assets, and I think that's going to help birth what we call this immersive language of content creation.
Awesome. We actually have another panel 15 minutes after our talk, so anyone that has questions, if you can please walk with us outside, just because we want to be respectful for the next panel.
It's cold out there.
Yeah. Or to the back. Thanks so much. Applause for the panel.
Awesome.